Okay, everybody, I think we're going to get started. Once again, thanks for your time. Thanks for participating in today's presentation. We have our wonderful speakers on deck to present career development in a post-COVID world. I just wanted to make some preliminary statements and introductions. My name is Rhonda Dearborn. I'm the Senior Acquisitions Editor for Behavioral Sciences, and I'm so proud to have worked with both Drs. Curry and Milsom on their the new edition of their book, Career and College Readiness Counseling. And I want to just make a couple of brief announcements here. One being that this presentation is being recorded and that it will be disseminated in about 7 to 10 business days, along with the PDF of today's presentation. So you will be getting a PDF of today's presentation, as well as a recording that will be disseminated by Springer Publishing in about 7 to 10 business days. We are also going to be taking questions. If you have any questions for the presenters, please put them in the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, but the Q&A box. And then we will be gathering the questions and posing your questions, if time allows, to Drs. Curry and Milsom at the conclusion of their presentation. So with that being said, I'm going to make some introductions here. First, I'm so thrilled to welcome Dr. Jennifer Curry. She is a professor in the College of Human Sciences and Education and teaches in the Counselor Education Program at Louisiana State University. Her research interests include career and college readiness and school counselor induction and development. Her professional experiences include investigating crimes against children and serving as an elementary, middle, and high school counselor. She has published over 50 peer-reviewed articles, and her latest book, Career and College Readiness Counseling in P-12 Schools, 3rd edition, published by Springer, and co-authored with Dr. Milsom. Dr. Curry currently serves as an associate editor for professional school counseling, and she has served as the president of the Louisiana School Counselor Association. She is the recipient of the ACA Ross Trust Award, A-Service's Judith Miranti Lifetime Service Award, the Biggs Pine Publication Award, LCA's Research Award, and LSU's Distinguished Faculty Award. Welcome, Dr. Curry. And then Dr. Amy Milsom. She is a professor and chair of the Department of Human Development and Psychological Counseling at Appalachian State University. She has over 25 years of experience in the counseling field as a counselor educator, a middle and high school counselor, and provider of counseling services to children, adolescents, and college students. Her research focuses on post-secondary transition planning and college readiness with an emphasis on students with disabilities. She currently serves as the chair of the KCREP Board of Directors. And again, she is the co-author of the newest edition of Career and College Readiness Counseling in P-12 Schools, which is the 3rd edition. So with that said, I'm going to turn it on over to Amy Milsom and Jen Curry. Thank you, guys.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for taking your time to be here. And some of you probably know us personally. And for those of you who don't, just want to say that it's really an honor to be here today and to be able to speak with you a little bit about this topic. And also I want to thank Springer for not only publishing our book, but working with us. It's a labor of love. Both for us as the authors, but also for them to work with us and try to get this book out in a timely manner for you, the consumer of the book, but also for students so that they have a chance to really get a hold of this and think about what it is to do career and college readiness counseling. And it's changing all the time. I think all the way back to when we did the 1st edition of this book, and literally so much has changed in 10 years. It's amazing. Every time we have done this book, this is the 3rd time, it's about a 50% revision for the book. So it's a true labor to do it. And we're really happy to be here to tell you a little bit about what's been happening with the pandemic and what we were learning as we were going back and revising the book. And we are only going to be able to talk about the tip of the iceberg in 30 minutes. But the purpose of what we're going to do here today is to talk a little bit about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the title, you might have seen that we said in a post-COVID world, and you might have said post-COVID, but we're still in the middle of this pandemic with this Omicron variant. And that's true. We are still in the midst of a pandemic. But when we said post-COVID, what we were thinking is truly we're in the midst of trying to help students consider we're not going to be able to go back to what was normal for them 2 years ago. And in many ways, that's a good thing. But not going back to that normal, what's changed and what's going to be the new pathway forward. So that's what we mean by post-COVID. So the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has changed students, of course, as learners, and the education system. And it's going to continue to change and affect change over probably the next decade. And in many ways, we're welcoming that change. And this webinar will discuss current research highlighting these changes and the impact on students as they make post-secondary education choices. And some of you, as you're working day to day, you're seeing this evolve literally day by day in policy, in practice, and with students as it's starting to affect how they think about their futures. So hopefully you'll get some practical information that you can take back with the students that you're working with by the end of this session. All right, so our objectives today are that when you walk away, you'll be able to describe ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic influenced the way we think about careers as a whole, and that you'll be able to articulate ways in which post-secondary education has changed. And then you'll be able to list 3 to 5 strategies for working with students in the post-secondary transition. All right, now, our first objective is that you would be able to describe ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the way we think about careers. And so even just hearing that objective, you may be thinking, it has changed nearly everything about the way we think about careers. So I want to kind of narrow that focus a little bit into how we think about careers and how we're thinking about advising students about careers in the future. Okay, so before we get into that though, we wanted to be able to talk to you a little bit about what we know right now about school counselors and how they worked with students and career development during the pandemic. There was a really great study done by Savitz Romer, and it was done in 2020. And what she found and her colleagues is that 72% of school counselors reported that during the height of the pandemic, they lacked direction or clear expectations from schools, districts, and state leadership. Now, because of this lack of clear direction and because they were often given duties that were outside of the focus of what school counselors normally do, and if you think about the Ask a National model, what they normally do within the scope of that model in terms of academic, career, and social emotional learning, school counselors reported that instead they were tasked with lots of different things like tracking students that had computers to use, tracking student attendance. I'm not saying those things aren't important, but as a result, instead, they were not doing the Ask a National model. So 25% of counselors reported spending less time on academics, 25% reported less time on college planning, and 50% spent less time on career development. Now, in terms of students getting ready to go to college, particularly high school students, this is very concerning because as you'll learn from us here today, and if you ever have read our book, career and college planning are step lock. And we really believe that career development is an entire K-12 process. So students need a lot of that career development, and there are developmental milestones that they should be getting every year. So if they're missing pieces of it, just like with math, if they're missing pieces of it, later on, it's going to impact their development. We want students to be able to have all of those pieces as they're going through K-12 so that they're ready to make informed decisions later in life about career. So for school counselors to not have that time with students means that it's possible students were missing time that they needed with a counselor in order to be able to get the career development that they needed. All right, now, around the same time, APA conducted a study called Stress in America. And in their study, APA was looking at Generation Z and what was happening with students. Students reported lots of effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. 50% said that the pandemic severely disrupted their plans for the future. And at the same time, Simpson Scarborough was also conducting a study, and their study reported pretty much corroborating evidence. So they conducted a study in 2021, and students said the same thing, that their plans for the future were disrupted. And a lot of the reason that the plans for the future were disrupted had to do with finances of the family, and also that they had a lack of planning opportunity. And the reason that they felt they had a lack of planning opportunity largely had to do with not being able to meet with a school counselor or being online. And being online meant that they weren't at school and had a reduced opportunity, of course, to meet with somebody face-to-face or to ask questions. So as you see here from the APA study, 51% reported that the pandemic made planning for the future feel impossible. And a lot of the reason for that, also from the Simpson Scarborough study, was that students felt they could not do college visits. They wanted to be able to tour campuses. Students were unsure about whether or not they were going to be a fit for a particular campus. In addition to that, a lot of students just were not really sure that they were prepared for college. And why that was is that they felt very disengaged. They did not feel motivated to do schoolwork. They felt disengaged from the work when they were doing it on the computer. And this was particularly true for students who spent more time online. 81% here in the APA study reported that they had been negatively impacted by school closures. And that was also corroborated by the Simpson Scarborough report.
Okay, it's my turn to jump in. Now that we've kind of set the stage with what the experience of school counselors and of students has been, we wanted to kind of present some themes, so to speak, in terms of what we anticipate and what research is suggesting is happening and will continue to happen in relation to careers. So the first big theme is this idea of shifting workforce needs. I think maybe you've probably seen this already wherever you're living, that jobs have changed, the needs of workers in different areas has shifted. We obviously need, I'll skip to the bottom part, the demand for workers in healthcare has grown already, and it's anticipated that that will continue to grow. So when we think about what do we know about occupations right now? We don't necessarily know what things are going to look like in another year, in another 2 years. I think in the past, there was a little more stability or a little slower shifting that we could predict for students and that we could point them to. And so some of that unknown might be cause for concern and worry amongst students and their families in terms of, what if I pursue this occupation or this pathway, and then 5 years from now, that's not relevant anymore. So we need to be thinking about how do we prepare people for those shifts. But the pandemic itself has and continues to affect the workforce. And so again, as the research here suggests, that jobs in warehouse and transportation, we talk about the supply chain issues, e-commerce and delivery, all of those occupations that relate to transportation of and production of services and goods are pretty pivotal right now. How long that will last is sort of the unknown, but we do know that right now, for people looking for work in the immediate future, those jobs are probably going to be in high demand. We can't predict further out. Similarly, customer service and food service jobs have fallen off. People are not going out as much. People are still not traveling as much. Again, I think there's going to be some shifts in those areas potentially down the line. But for the moment, the future doesn't look so great. So again, I think it becomes a lot more challenging to help people plan ahead when we're still in this time of uncertainty. So that's just something to keep in mind, and to help students and their families be prepared to pivot. I hate that word. I'm sick of that word, but to pivot. The other piece that I think is really interesting, especially for those of us who are counselors, is this idea of work-life balance. And again, you've probably either yourself experienced this or have a lot of friends and colleagues talking about what you're willing to put up with in your job and what you're not anymore. Again, recent research is suggesting that nearly 8 in 10 workers want their company to focus on well-being much more. They're looking for benefits and policies related to supporting their workers. A lot of places are shifting to a hybrid workplace model where, in the past, everybody was expected to be in the office from, 9 to 5, so to speak. And now companies are recognizing that it is important to let people have flexibility to work from home. I think we all realized that we can do our jobs effectively even when we're not in the office. And so what does that mean? And so for your students, and again, for their families whose mindsets might be what used to be, it's a matter of helping them think about what is really important, what really matters to you, what are you looking for, and how do you ask the questions to really explore occupations with those wellness related things in mind. The company culture here as well is thinking about what message do they send, through their policies, through their sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, through what they communicate about the expectations of their workers. And so again, I think those are just different kind of conversations than potentially you might have had with students early on that would be important to think about now. And then again, the research is suggesting, and I find this interesting, not surprising, but interesting, that younger workers are more likely than older employees to accept smaller pay increases in exchange for those non-monetary benefits, mental health benefits and unlimited sick time and, the remote work. It's like, I think often people assume that younger people want more money. All they're out, for in their jobs is money. And that's certainly not true. It's a misconception. But research is actually showing that these things are valued much more by the younger generation. So again, validating the importance of looking for those kinds of things as you're helping students explore occupations, I think is important. And then again, just this idea of new possibilities. I think Jen spoke previously to the stress and even anxiety that some students can feel about things are not possible anymore. I don't feel like, I have a future. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. And in some ways that can be very stressful, but the idea of new possibilities can also be very freeing if you can get yourself to settle into that. And for a lot of populations, the pandemic has actually opened up doors. And so, for example, Beery in 2020 reported that, of the 61 million Americans with disabilities, and that's a broad definition of disability, the ability to work, learn, and socialize from home has been unexpected. And it has helped to expand possibilities for people whose disability led to functional limitations in their ability to either attend a workplace, for a full day or interact. Opportunities that they could engage in from home, allowed them to contribute in ways that maybe they hadn't before. So what does that mean for the future? And for any of the students that you might be working with, you might have thought, oh, I'm limited, or this is not an option for me. Well, maybe it is now, and let's dig a little deeper. Again, remote work options has opened up doors for people to consider, especially, and I think about where I'm living, and I'm in the mountains. You can see my background. It's very expensive up here in the mountains in a resort area. People don't move here or have a hard time moving here. But maybe if I could work remotely, I could still take a job in that area, maybe go up once in a while, but I could afford to live, somewhere else. So things like that are helpful to consider when you're exploring the financial aspects with students and their families. And then again, looking at the various ways that you can help students explore careers via assessments. You probably use, if you're in schools, a lot of different tools. ONET is sort of a very strong and free opportunity that's online, and they're very up to date with their information. We've linked a couple other things here, but I know you all probably have access to a lot of different tools to explore possibilities. So again, just helping students not to think that, not to limit themselves, I guess, is the big thing. And then shifting to our second objective, and thinking about post-secondary education. Again, any of you working in higher education right now, you could probably rattle off the numbers and numbers of ways that post-secondary education has changed for the better and for the worse, maybe. And like before, we want to just hone in on a few things that we think are most relevant in the time that we have here with you. So in terms of admissions requirements, again, I think we all came to see that pretty quickly students had to take admissions exams online, but what that also led to is institutions taking a second look at, do we really need to require, you know, these standardized assessments? What is the value of doing that? We know that over time, there's been a lot of controversy about standardized testing in relation to admissions, but more and more institutions have gotten rid of those requirements. And many of them, as the ACT has reported, have suggested that they might not return back to requiring those in the future. And so, you know, when you have these test optional admissions requirements, it may sound great and students might get really excited. One, it saves them some money, you know, and two, it's certainly for those who struggle with testing can relieve a little anxiety. But the one thing that you want to make sure that you're pointing students and their families to is that oftentimes institutions still have scholarships or fellowships or funding that is connected to a requirement of having an SAT score or an ACT score. They haven't always changed their policies related to the awarding of those kinds of things to match the admissions requirements. So even though the test might be optional, it really might not be optional if you want to seek that kind of funding. And so making sure that you're helping students explore what it might mean to not take an admissions test in that sense. Smith also suggested that because this test optional approach is becoming more common, that institutions are going to have to fall back onto other things more than they're used to. And so even in larger institutions, it's hard to envision how they're going to manage the numbers per se, but the recommendation letters and the essays that students write are going to be looked at more thoroughly. And so again, it's just a shift in the way perhaps you all who've helped students have thought about it. Students may not have been prepared for that shift, but so really helping them hone in on how to work on those and who to ask for recommendations and what kind of information is really important to convey. And then again, as institutions have to be a little more creative in screening applicants without what they're used to, a standardized test score, it's that rethinking, well, you know, what really matters? Maybe persistence and perseverance and, you know, adversity and all of those things that I think we all know, you know, contribute to a person's ability to be successful in life. Institutions are struggling with how to wrap those into their admissions decision-making policies as well. So again, more digging around with your students to make sure that they know what options exist for the schools that they're applying to. And then finally, before I shift back to Jen, financially, obviously, things have changed quite a bit. We all know that the cost of four-year D has increased, you know, exponentially, much more than the cost of living, and research certainly still supports that. What we're seeing and hearing about a lot is, you know, a lot of states and even national discussion about should community college be free, and it is in many places. You know, I have personally seen and heard a lot of students who have, more so than in the past, who have chosen to start their post-secondary educational careers at a two-year college to save money so they can live at home. You know, but then the other piece is, well, what is the impact on four-year schools? Is enrollment at four-year schools going to change because more students are taking credits at two-year colleges? That's not really, I guess, of your concern so much as you're helping students. It's like, how can they get what they need? And I think the biggest thing that you would want to help them explore if they're choosing to take courses or start at a two-year college is making sure that those credits will transfer to a four-year school if they want that later. The articulation agreements that exist between two-year colleges and four-year colleges are really important. And my guess is that you're going to have more time that you're spending helping students navigate how to explore those things before than you have before. And again, financially, we've seen an increase in online programs. There is more and more discussion about shifting undergraduate programs online. Oftentimes, though, yes, they're accessible. You can be at home. It can be convenient, but sometimes the prices of those online programs are much higher. And so online doesn't necessarily equate to cheaper. And so again, making sure that you're helping students explore really fully all of those things. So back to Jen.
All right, so one new term you may be hearing is COVID melt. And you probably have heard before summer melt. And summer melt, for those of you who don't know, is the phenomenon where students who are planning to go to college, maybe between the time that they either make the plan to go to college at the end of high school, either end up not enrolling, or they do enroll, but they don't show up to college in the fall. That is melt, summer melt. So something happens in the summer that causes them to change their mind. And this phenomenon affects students who are low income and students of color. Often the reason that the summer melt occurs is for financial reasons. COVID melt, similar. So what's happening with COVID melt isn't necessarily a summer phenomenon, though. It can happen anytime. And a lot of the reason that COVID melt happens is, of course, because students have a situation that occurs where they can no longer pay for their education. U.S. Census Bureau found that in 2021, so this is just last year, over 6 million college students were not able to pay for their classes or their educational expenses. And Amy had just talked about that we've seen such an increase in college costs, and often these are hidden costs. So students are aware of college tuition, but a lot of times they're not aware of the other expenses that they're going to have to pay. And those expenses are things like fees, of course, books, things that they're just not prepared for. Maybe that they're going to have to live that first year on campus for certain universities or what have you. And so making sure that students, of course, are prepared for that. But then in addition, Pell Grant recipients often are asked to do the verification process. And that verification process can be very cumbersome. There's up to 100 questions that students are asked in the verification process. Well, if you didn't have the knowledge to answer all of the questions on the FAFSA, then answering that verification process can be very difficult. And a lot of times students are getting those questions in the summertime. So making sure that students know somebody at the institution that they're going to in financial aid, where they can go and ask extra questions, can be helpful. This again, disproportionately is going to be low-income students, obviously for the Pell Grant, and students of color. Students from Black majority communities were 1.8 times more likely to be selected for verification than those from white majority communities, and Latino majority communities, that rate was 1.4 times higher. So just again, making sure that there is something in place for those students. There are lots of resources on the financial aid website. I really suggest that you look at making sure that students know how to fill out their financial aid form, making sure that students know ahead of time to be checking their email consistently for when they get a response from financial aid, and just trying to check in ahead of time with their financial aid officer at the school that they're going to. All right. So some campuses that are going to emerge from COVID-19 very successfully are going to be a little bit more smaller than the others. They may be more flexible and adaptable. They're going to learn that, okay, in order for us to do well, we're going to have to shrink our campus a little bit. And by shrink, I don't necessarily mean literally the size, but they may be shrinking services in ways that they're able to connect with students better. So that could be connecting with students through things like financial aid, or helping students when they get onto campus to access resources better. If they are not on campus, if they're an online student, making sure that online students know where they can get that Center for Academic Success support, making sure where they can get the tutoring, making sure that they know where mental health support is. If it is an online campus that has a physical campus attached, they really are supposed to have equitable services for students that are online that are the same services as the students who are face-to-face are getting. So if you have students who are transitioning to college this year, you may want to go ahead and help your students think about, where do I find mental health support on campus? Where do I find tutoring support on campus? There's a great lesson plan to do with your seniors and helping them to locate those services on the campus that they're planning to transition to, whether it's a technical school, a community college, a four-year university. College orientations are being conducted differently, as are college visits. A lot of those have gone online, and students a lot of times are kind of resistant to that. They want to go on a campus visit, so it's important just to let them know that that's pretty normal now, and getting them used to that earlier in high school, maybe 9th grade, 10th grade, talk about those orientations being online. Some students may consider a gap year to save money. So a lot of students maybe want to take a year or two off. If you have students who say, I'm going to take a gap year to save money, I highly recommend that if they want to do that, that they still need to go through with applying for college and getting admitted to college, having a contact and enrollment services at the college they're going to, and requesting a deferment, so that they know where they're going, that they have a plan, and then having a budget so they know how much they need to save. They're not just taking a year off and or 2 years without a really structured plan, and that there's a re-entry plan for them. That way they have that application done, they have the college picked out, and they know how much they need to save. They have that long-term plan.
Okay, so I realize we have hit our half-hour mark, so I think Jen and I will just very quickly walk through some of the strategies, really just kind of summarizing what we had talked through before, but our final objective was to give you some practical takeaways. So in relation to career, I'm going back to what I talked about previously with the kind of work-life balance and the focus on wellness. And I think that's where values comes in a lot, what matters to you. And so I don't know how much working on or exploring values has been a part of what you've done with students, but given the shifts that, again, we've seen with the pandemic, that seems like a really important thing to make sure that you're spending time doing. Educating families about the changing trends, again, the fact that we can't always predict, but here's where you can find information, pointing them to these tools like the ONET and regional and geographic area things that are relevant to them can help to ensure that they're trying to make educated decisions about what things they pursue. And then this final piece of conveying an anything might be possible attitude. I think sometimes students and or their families will limit themselves, and it's your job to really help them consider opportunities that maybe they're ruling out. So that's the quick in a nutshell for career.
All right, and so continuing to help students understand those admission requirements and then the implications of their choices, provide support for understanding financial implications. And this can be done in lots of ways. So helping students to use those online tools, those dashboards like the College Navigator, the net price calculator, we go through these in the book. I cannot encourage you enough. Get online and play with those. Those are really, really easy to use tools. The DOE College Scorecard, they're really fun to get on and navigate with, and they're accessible. They're easy to use. So teaching families and students to use those is not hard to do, and encourage students to consider their own strengths and weaknesses. I had a student tell me one time that he wasn't going to go to a particular university because it was a party school and he knew that he would party too much. And I thought, that was great insight. I've also had students recently telling me they don't want to be online because it's really hard for them to learn online. Conversely, I'm having other students say, I loved learning online. It gave me a lot of flexibility. I miss the online environment. I need that because I need to be able to work 2 jobs. This is the kind of strengths we want our students to be taking away from this pandemic. They need to be able to look at themselves, look at the current environment, and navigate their own strengths.
Hi, all. This is Rhonda Dearborn chiming in again. I'm the senior editor for behavioral sciences here at Springer, and I want to thank Drs. Curry and Milsom again for this really succinct but informative presentation. And we do want to open it up for questions. I've been keeping track of some of the questions that have been posed so far. And if you all, Jen, want to move on to the next slide, I just want to speak briefly to this. We are offering up a discount code. You can see webinar 25 at the bottom of your screen. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of Career and College Readiness Counseling in P through 12 Schools 3rd edition, you can click through to the URL that we have posted here. You can also see a sample chapter that you can see for free. If you're interested in looking at adoption opportunities, if you want to get this book and require it for your class, you can contact our sales rep, Jill Legg, and you can see her email information there. If you are interested in bulk sales for continuing education or professional use or any of those areas that are not academic sales, you can contact our Director of Special Sales and Business Development, Lee Montville, and you can see his contact information there as well. So again, thanks for this presentation, ladies. It was really informative, and we really got a lot out of it. And I'm going to pose a couple of questions to you that we have from the group. The first one is, how do you predict the mental health struggles of the pandemic, how the pandemic will impact students' self-efficacy and positive outlooks for the future?
Isn't that the big question? It's hard to know, right? But I think what I'm seeing and what you're probably seeing is that as students struggle with mental health in many ways, and Jen can chime in, you know, it affects their academics, it affects their ability to focus. And as they get behind in their work or they struggle with their work, then they start to feel less positive about themselves and less positive about their ability to be successful. So it just kind of spirals. And I think we need to be as proactive as we can in terms of recognizing when students need support, providing supports, helping them to be patient with themselves and look for opportunities. Jen, I don't know if you want to chime in with.
Yeah, one thing that I will say is that I'm seeing more and more school districts that are understanding that social emotional learning is something we all need to be involved in, including from teachers, principals, everybody. And that's one thing I feel very hopeful about. They've seen that students have a lot of anxiety, more anxiety than I think I can say I've ever seen. So anxiety and depression are the two top things that mental health centers in college campuses see. And it's gone through the roof during the pandemic. So in K-12 schools, of course, this is an ongoing problem as well. I think if we could get away from a culture of constant testing and accountability, that would also help. Teachers are feeling very stressed. I can't say enough that there's ways to help with this. So social emotional learning, but also helping the adults to feel less stressed. And I know school counselors are feeling the pressure to help their colleagues, not even just the students. So this is something that's getting a lot of attention. I think we have a Secretary of Education that has really spotlighted this. And I would encourage everybody to continue to highlight it in your own schools and in your districts, but definitely it's starting to finally get a lot of attention. And we actually talk about this in the book, social emotional learning and self-regulatory mechanisms, and students need that. It's part of career development.
Thank you. Next question. How might school counselors, quote unquote, widen their STEM perspective, i.e. beyond how ACT defines STEM careers or the STEM career cluster, in order to encourage students to pursue STEM careers?
I'm super passionate about this. There are a lot of free programs out there, and I think that we need to both in and out of school be using those. I just went to a training myself. There's a free program. I want everybody to know about this program. It's called code.org, code.org. Totally free. There's no reason that every student in K-12 isn't using technology. What I love about this program is that you don't have to even use a computer to learn coding in K-5. It's a total K-12 program. There's lots of free programs and communities for engineering for kids. Our public libraries offer lots of free programming. In the book, we talk a lot about community partnerships for programming and for whether it's engineering, STEM, science, math. Myself, I really feel like there's lots of ways to integrate this stuff. I don't want to go on a total tangent here, but programs like code.org are wonderful programs to integrate. But one thing that we have to do better, and this is the thing that you're going to hear consistently in the book, we have to help kids make connections between what they're learning in school and the world of work. So whether it's solving an algebra problem or whether it's learning about chemistry, what are the careers where you would use this? And that's one of the things that I talk about all the time. We have to help kids see the connection between what they're doing daily so that they're not saying, why do we have to learn this? I'm never going to use it. Because they're going to use these things and not just use it for school, but use it literally in their careers. So there's lots of opportunities for STEM.
Okay, and one more question. What about the career track, non-college strategies, different opportunities presenting themselves during this time, or are they more difficult to navigate because of the pandemic, hands-on training, things like that?
Can you ask that again? I feel like I missed it.
Sorry. Yeah, career track, non-college readiness, non-college strategies, different opportunities presenting themselves during COVID for students who want to pursue career tracks that don't involve college. Is that more difficult now because of the pandemic? And I'm guessing that means, opportunities for hands-on skills training might be difficult if people have to wear masks or have to be via distance.
I love this question. So these positions like apprenticeships, I think is pretty much what this is getting at. Things like apprenticeships, job shadowing, practicum during high school are growing by leaps and bounds. And part of the reason we talk about this a bit in the book is that we actually have a decreasing population in the US. A lot of people don't really realize that, but for 38 years, women have had fewer children. You need 2.1 births for every woman in order to replace the population. And women have about 1.6 children now, or less. And millennials have had less children. We expect Gen Z will have less children. And so we're having less and less children. And then with the baby boomers leaving the job place, the workplace, we've had a lot of people leave and we can't replace them. This is why you're seeing so many people say, oh, we need your students. They need them both on CTE tracks. Colleges need your students. Everybody is desperate for your students. And you're probably thinking, why is everybody so desperate for students all of a sudden? It's because there are not enough bodies. In 2008, for every open job there were 7.1 people unemployed. Then you started hearing around 2019, 2018, that we had this great unemployment rate. There was like one person for every open job. That wasn't because of any particular political party. That was because of women. We actually have been in the job market and working since the 1960s and 70s. And as a result, over those decades, started having fewer and fewer kids. And teenagers are having fewer teen pregnancies. So over time, our population has started to decrease. We actually have 4 states where there are more deaths than births every year now. So that's something to think about. Now, because of that, people need to start training kids. That's why you're hearing people talk about the Swiss vet model and what they do in England. So when you hear people talking about that, the reason they're talking about it is because in other countries, they start training about 2/3 of their population while they're still in high school to work in these career and technical jobs. Only about 1/3 of their population goes to college. Now, having said that, I don't think that that's going to be our percentage, but we are going to see quite a few more students starting to get apprenticeships because companies are so desperate. Our manufacturers are desperate to get students. People are literally desperate to get your students because they can't fill the positions and they're not going to be able to fill them. And over the next decade, you're going to see more and more of that. So you're hearing states passing legislation for apprenticeships to fund these. Lots of states are doing that. South Carolina, Colorado has legislation like this, California. So yes, that's going to continue to actually increase.
Great answer. Thank you so much. We did get a question, what career assessments are best to use for students with learning disabilities?
I can tackle that. I think that's not a blanket answer because every decision needs to be determined based on what the disability is and what the concerns are. Any student with a learning disability could potentially use any assessment that you're using with every other student. What you're going to want to make sure is that they're understanding what they're answering. You know, if their learning disability relates to their ability to read and comprehend, then do they need an accommodation? Does somebody need to read the questions to them or ensure that they understand what they're answering before they answer it? You know, every learning disability is a little bit different. If they, there is an assessment called the Reading Free Vocational Interest Inventory. It's pictures. You know, there are pros and cons to using any kind of an assessment. This is one that you would have to purchase. You know, if you have a district-wide career assessment tool that's free, you know, is there funding available to purchase a unique assessment that could be more helpful? I think that's a question you'd have to ask. But again, I think with a learning disability in general, there's no reason any student couldn't benefit from any of the tools that you have at your fingertips. It's just, again, what might you need to do to ensure that they can accurately work with that tool.
Thanks, Amy. I've got one more question that came in. In what ways might school counselors reduce the stigma for students who want to pursue technical colleges? Especially, how might we help families and students understand that, you know, a technical career, a manufacturing career is far different than decades ago?
I can start. I see Jen nodding. That's always challenging, right? No matter where you are. But I think some of that goes back to, you know, having conversations with students and their families about what matters to them. What is it that they want? You know, if they're looking for prestige, you know, and there's a concern that somebody in their community, in their family is not going to be, you know, finding prestige in a job as a welder, you know, then maybe that informs their decision. If they want, I think it just goes back to what matters to them, helping them to explore options that fit their needs and their desires, and helping them proactively think about how they would navigate questions and concerns that other people express about their career choices. I don't know that that concern is ever going to go away, but there are a lot of technical and two-year related degrees and occupations that people are making way more money than those who go into college and come out with a lot of debt, that they have flexible work hours, that, you know, I think they can find occupations in any area.
And be entrepreneurial, I would imagine, as well, in some cases, way more than if you get a 4-year degree in liberal arts or something like that. So, well, that's it. Thank you so much.
Oh, I was going to add something to that last.
Oh, sure, Jen.
Sorry. One thing that I like to explain to families too. So you have a lot of parents, more grandparents or guardians that are maybe my age. And so I'm not going to say what my age is, but that grew up at a time when we had VOTEC, and they remember, you know, people standing, maybe outside at a building, working on a car, smoking a cigarette. People, I mean, they did that in my high school, standing out there smoking cigarettes. And they're thinking like, why would I let my kid go into VOTEC, or my grandkid, or like whoever is their student? And today's CTE is totally different because you can actually get an industry recognized credential. We talk about this in the book. It's very different because you're getting a portable industry recognized credential in many cases. And actually students on CTE tracks graduate at much higher rates than the average high school population. So these are not what they used to be. And they tend to work toward a credential while they're still in high school. Often they are working and going to school at the same time. And that's really important as well. So explaining that there's also post-secondary training that's happening at the same time. So maybe that they're going to be doing some dual enrollment, that there is a post-secondary option as well that they're going to be pursuing that goes with that CTE training at the high school level. So I want to point out that this is very different than what their parent or guardian may have seen when they were in school. And that can sometimes help alleviate some of those concerns as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our participants today for spending this time with us. I want to thank Jennifer Curry, Amy Milsom. I want to thank our internal folks here at Springer who helped put this together. And once again, this has been recorded. We will be disseminating the recording out to folks via email in 7 to 10 business days, along with a PDF of this presentation. And I want you all to have a great afternoon, and I thank you again for everything. Great presentation. Bye-bye.